with that, let's get our meeting, March 20th meeting, to order. Thank you all for attending. It's good to be with you, at least online. Since we are online, I have a statement to read at the beginning of our session. The Critical Area Commission is holding this meeting virtually using Microsoft Teams and will be streamed live to the public. The public will be able to view the meeting from the Commission's website. Minutes of the meeting will also be provided on our website. We ask that microphones be muted. We ask that you hold all questions or comments until the end of each presentation. If you have a question or comment, please note in the chat box you would like to speak or raise your hand. I will call your name in order. Please announce yourself by name when speaking so that any attendees on the phone can identify you. If you are joining the meeting by phone, press *6 to unmute yourself. The public was invited to submit written comments on any agenda item up to 24 hours prior to the meeting. Any comments, if received, will be read by the executive director at the appropriate time. Hi, Annie. All right. With that, do I dare a roll call, Ms. Charbonneau?
Yes, we can do a roll call. So I will call the names of those commissioners I know who are on, and at the end, if I've missed anyone, please speak up. But we have present Commissioner Bunker, Commissioner Gerthofer, Commissioner Rosa Hance, Commissioner Hewitt, Commissioner Marion, Commissioner Patel, Commissioner Annie Richards, Commissioner Roche, Commissioner Palma, Commissioner Herb Cornwell, Commissioner Morgan, Commissioner McCall, Commissioner Mulkey, Commissioner Robertson, and Commissioner Hurt sitting in for Sean Kiernan.
Wonderful.
Anyone else?
Right. If I did my math correctly, I think we have achieved the quorum. We shall proceed. All right. With that, let's begin with the approval of the February 7th, 2024 meeting minutes. You've had a chance to review those. Is there any discussion, edits, friendly amendments to the minutes? Seeing and hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Here, Marion, with the motion, is there a second?
Rosa Hance, second.
Thank you, Rosa. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Anyone abstaining?
This is Commissioner Robertson. I was not in attendance, so I'll be abstaining from the vote.
So noted, Tammy. Thank you.
This is Commissioner Gerthofer, and I was not present either, so I'll abstain.
Okay. 2 abstentions. Anyone else? Very good. The meeting minutes are approved. With that, we'll move to our first agenda item for today. This is informational on a regulatory package that our staff has been working on for a long time. They'll give you all the details, but just broadest picture, we've had regulations associated with the critical area program for decades, and in many ways they are a bit of a patchwork. Some go back to the 80s when the program was first conceived. Some date from more recent times when the Commission got its own regulatory authority back in 2008. But in any case, it never hurts to polish things up. We view this package almost entirely as non-substantive, in that sense, meaning it is not intended to change policy of the Commission. What it is intended to do is to make it more readable, make it more current, make sure it's all legally defensible and clear. And Lisa Herger and Kate Durant will walk us through it. So with that, Lisa and Kate, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. Good afternoon, everyone. Kate Durant and myself, Lisa Herger, are going to hopefully give you a nice broad brush of what these regulations are for in the next few minutes. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of history of how our regulations evolved over the years. So as all of you know, the critical area law was passed by the General Assembly in 1984. And when that law was passed, it's very similar, 25 members, which was later, as some of you know, in the early 2000s, changed to 29 members with the addition of the Atlantic Coastal Bays. The goals are still the same ever since the 80s. And one of the things that the law also said, which was a little particular to the commission, and that was primarily because the law was somewhat controversial at the time, was that the commission was required to promulgate regulations, and those regulations would have to be approved or blessed off, if you will, by the General Assembly through a joint resolution. So that was kind of an unusual step that the new agency had to take back in the early 80s. So at the time, the commission didn't have staff until probably January of 1985. So the law was passed. I guess it was effective in June, and the commission hit the ground running. And it had its first official meeting in the fall of that year in October. And at its December meeting, its second official meeting, it assigned itself 3 different subcommittees to work on these regulations. Now, sometimes you'll hear us say critical area criteria. It's pretty much synonymous with regulations. So we use those words interchangeably. I know I do as staff. So if you hear me say criteria, talking about our regulations in COMAR. The 3 subcommittees kind of followed the 3 goals of the law. So one was a development subcommittee that looked at development criteria that local governments would follow. The second was called the Resource Protection Subcommittee, and that's the one that looked at the buffer, looked at forest and developed woodlands and plant and wildlife habitats and anadromous fish and wetland issues. And the third was the Resource Utilization Subcommittee that looked at forestry, surface mining, agricultural type criteria. By the time January of 1985 rolled around, there was staff on board. And the commission met bi-weekly for probably 3.5 months. It was also required by the General Assembly to hold a minimum of 6 public hearings. So once these regulations were published in the Maryland Register, which didn't happen until June of 1985, so almost a year later after the law was passed, there had to be multiple public hearings. And subsequent to that, the regulations were republished 2 more times that year, once in September and once in November. And there were additional 9 public hearings. So these regulations were thoroughly vetted through any type of stakeholder that was involved in the process back in the mid 80s. It finally got to the Maryland General Assembly in 1986, who, as I said before, by joint resolution, adopted the criteria. So that's how we begun. So it wasn't until 2008 with House Bill 1253, where one of the provisions of that law was to allow the commission for the first time to promulgate regulations on its own without a joint resolution by the General Assembly. So since that time, kind of as Eric was referencing earlier, Chair Fisher, is that we've been doing some patchwork, catching up with our regulations. One of the first ones we did were the buffer regulations, where we completely tossed the whole chapter out and completely started over and put a lot more definition and details into that regulation. So we have caught up, and as Chair Fisher said, we're at a point now where we have, over the last several years, been fixing a lot of the chapters to bring them up to date with other laws that have come onto the books or regulations, either via Maryland Department of the Environment with their wetlands regulations or shore erosion control regulations, or with the Department of Agriculture, and worked with those state agencies to make sure the regulations were updated. So this is truly a non-substantive effort of kind of going through the whole Title 27 and making sure that it's as modernized as possible. So with that, I will turn it over to Kate, and she's going to walk you through some of those changes.
Thanks, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned, we undertook this process because we need to provide a comprehensive update. A lot of these sections have not been updated in decades, so we need to modernize the text. And that is partially due to the Division of State Documents has requirements on how things should be worded and the style of phrasing and things of that nature. This is our most comprehensive proposal to date. As Lisa also mentioned, we've done some piecemeal bits and pieces, but this time we really looked at the entirety of the regulations. And there are updates in all 3 of the subtitles. So, just as a quick review for everyone, COMR Title 27 has 3 subtitles. The first subtitle is for local programs and local projects within the local programs. Subtitle 2 applies to state agency or local agency projects. And there are many similarities to Subtitle 01 within Subtitle 02, but there are also some changes or some differences, sorry, not changes, just differences of how a state and local agency project is applied. And then Subtitle 3 deals with the process of how and what to submit. We had 4 goals for this comprehensive update. The first goal was to repeal outdated provisions and definitions. Our second goal was to add new definitions and or update definitions as needed. Some of the updated definitions were done again to meet those sort of style requirements from the Division of State Documents. And some of them were updated to make sure that they were in line with definitions from other state agencies. We also performed some stylistic changes. Again, that gets back to that Division of State Documents requirements. And we wanted to clarify and make corrective changes just to make it a little, just to fix a few small things, we'll say. As we go through this presentation, I will show examples of each of these goals, but also be aware that some of the changes that you will see in the draft document are actually combinations of these 4 goals. And I will go over an example at the end of the presentation just to highlight how something can look like we're removing a large chunk of language, but we're really just reorganizing it. So we know that many of you review updates to legislation and regulations somewhat regularly. We also know that not all of the jurisdictions that we deal with have the same methods for showing what text is to be removed and what text is to be added. So we wanted to briefly cover how we are showing it in this draft document. This is the definition for afforestation, which has text that's being repealed and replaced. As you can see, the bracketed area shown here in the highlighted section is proposed to be removed. So anything you see in brackets is proposed for removal. And then the italicized language here is proposed as the new language. So that's just what you're looking out for as you go forward. If it's in brackets, it's to be deleted. And if it is in italics, it is to be added. So our first goal of this project was to repeal outdated information. So here's a list of definitions that we are repealing from the current regulations. The reason that these are being repealed is that they are not used within the text of the regulations. So they do not need to be in the definition section. And here are a couple of examples. Again, you can see the brackets go around the entire word and the sentence. So barren land means unmanaged land having sparse vegetation. That entire sentence is being removed. The same for hydrophytic vegetation. The second goal was updating definitions. This is not an extensive list of the updated definitions. You'll definitely see that there are some updates to definitions throughout the section. We just wanted to highlight a couple of them for things to look out for. And here are two examples of what the updated definitions can look like. In the anadromous fish definition, you can see that there's a combination of brackets and italicized words. So this definition is mostly being updated to make it clearer and easier to read. We want to make it more concise. In the definition for non-tidal wetland, we are replacing a reference to another regulation with a reference to the environment article. And you'll see this for several definitions where we previously referenced another regulation, and we are now choosing to reference either an environment article or a natural resources article or some other version of the statute. We also added some new definitions. So this is still that second goal of adding new and updating. This is, again, a short list of new definitions that we've added, just to let you know that they're there. And it may seem weird that intensely developed area, limited developed area, and resource conservation area were not included in the regulations, but they are all defined in the natural resources article. We wanted to add them to the regulations at this time. And you can see in this new definition of intensely developed area, we are referencing the definition that is within the natural resources article. And then we are also referencing the criteria that is within these regulations. So we didn't have them in the regulations previously, but now we're adding them in. We always had a definition for them. The next example I have is for the definition of stormwater. We are adding a definition for stormwater. This one references another regulation. It's MDE's regulations. Sorry. And we also added a letter B, and you'll notice it says stormwater includes runoff and so associated with, and then there's a list. We say includes, we do not need to say includes but not limited to, because by saying includes, we are implying the but not limited to. So anytime you see includes, that means it is not an extensive list. There may be other things there that are not part of it. Goal 3 was to make stylistic changes. Some examples of these are throughout the document. Sorry, I'm going to have a sip of water. We changed the word chairman to chair. We also replaced the phrase that is with the phrase such as. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we removed the but not limited to when it's associated with includes. So anywhere where it says includes, it used to say but not limited to. And we also replaced equal to or greater than with at least, so that it's more concise language. The goal of the stylistic changes overall is to have more concise, easier to understand language. An example of that is this section of the regulations under resource conservation area. And you can see I've highlighted the areas where we've replaced that is, which is in brackets, with such as, which is shown in italics. And then I've also highlighted these areas is in brackets, and it was replaced with this land classification to help make the sentence easier to understand and to know what it was referring to, more specific. So the last goal was to make what we're calling corrective changes. All of the corrective changes that we've made within the draft regulations are outlined in the memo that you received on pages 2 and 3. We're going to highlight a couple of them here just to give you an idea of what we were looking at. You'll see the example for riparian areas and port on the next 2 slides. And we also added a provision for tier 3 streams because we already have an existing provision for tier 1 and tier 2 streams. And so we just added it in so that we had the same provisions for all of the streams. So the first example I have for corrective change is that we've added riparian areas. This is under the resource conservation area section of the regulations. And previously we said conserve the existing developed woodlands and forests. Now we are saying conserve the existing developed woodlands, forests, and riparian areas for the water quality benefits that they provide. We never explicitly stated riparian areas before, but it was always implied, and that was how we approached the regulations. And then again, this definition is major development. This is in subtitle 2, so this relates to state and local agency projects. Under the definition for major development, we added port. Again, this is also under major development includes, so this was never meant to be an exclusive list, but we've added ports, even though it was never explicitly stated before. Any port project was always viewed as major development. Before I go to the next slide, and I know since we're meeting virtually, it's a little more complicated, but I wanted to highlight an example that shows how there may be instances where we've made a bunch of these changes, and it looks like we may be proposing to remove a lot of language and replace it with a lot of language. But when you dig into it, you'll notice that all of the language that's being removed has basically just been reorganized into a slightly different format that will hopefully be easier to understand. So on pages 8 through 12 of the draft regulations, starting on page 8 at line 24, you'll see an opening bracket, and that the ending bracket goes on page 9 at line 31. So that's a large chunk of information that's being proposed to be removed. The new language then starts also on page 9 on line 31 and goes until page 12, line 10. We essentially rewrote the general policies section under chapter 2, which is development in the critical area, because we wanted to have some information that was truly general policies, but then we also created 2 new subsections under that relate to general criteria and restricted activities to make it easier to understand what was listed. So it's not just everything is a list. It's pulled out and made a little bit more specific and more concise. So all of the information that is proposed to be removed from that section actually exists in the proposed language that follows it. And that will also include some stylistic changes in how we phrase things. It may also include updating some of the language, but it is all there. So I just wanted to highlight, like, you might see a couple of sections like that, but everything that is being proposed to be removed is being added back. And in this case, we also wanted to make sure that the general policies applied to all three land classifications. So intensely developed area, limited development area, and resource conservation area. With that, we'll move on to our proposed next steps. We would like the commissioners to review the draft. We do recognize that it is 81 pages. We apologize for that, but as Lisa mentioned in the memo, some of those pages are, and some of that information is provided so that there is context related to what we are proposing to either remove or to add. And we would also like you to contact Lisa and I if you have any questions or concerns. Our next step as staff, which we've already completed, is to send the draft regulations to interested parties and solicit their feedback. And in this case, the interested parties are the local jurisdictions, as they are the ones that will have to implement the changes. And with that, I will turn it to Lisa, who also has some information about the next steps.
Thank you, Kate. That was a really good summary. So now on to the Funhouse slide. Kind of going back into the regulatory process. In Maryland, the regulatory promulgation process takes a minimum of 94 days. So we are told by the Division of State Documents, and that's where I've gotten this flow chart. So if the commission is ready to allow staff to submit these regulations into that process at the May meeting, the first thing that we would do is we send it to what's called the AELR committee, which is the Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review Committee. It's made up of 10 senators and 10 delegates who review the regulations, along with 2 of their staff. One of the staff persons reviews it for fiscal reasons, and another one reviews it to ensure that what we are proposing, we have the authority to do. That's another unique thing about our law. When it was updated in 2008, we have a specific section in our law that details every single type of change we can make to the law with regard to policy areas. But because these are pretty much stylistic, it shouldn't be an issue. So the AELR committee, as you can see on the slide, has 15 days. And once that time is over, and during that time, we might get calls from their staff. We might get questions that we answer. Then it gets published in the Maryland Register, and there's a 30-day public comment period. The other thing that the commission does that we decided to adopt when we started doing regulations back in the early 2000s was we try to do all of our stakeholder processing way before we even bring it to you all. So we're fairly confident that we have all the comments that we might otherwise receive during this process. The reason we do that is if during the 30-day comment period, we get comments that could be ones where we feel as if we need to make a change to this package, and they're considered substantive changes, so they would have a greater effect of a regulation on the regulated parties, then we would have to start all over. So we try to avoid that by doing all of our homework ahead of time. And if we do get public comment, we do respond to whomever submits it. And then after 45 days have passed from the publication date, we bring it back to you all for one last look. We also update the commission on any public comments that were received and how we responded to them, and if we think we need to make any changes. And then we move forward with final publication. So that's a minimum of 94 days. our process, as Kate just flipped the screen, for us, it's a minimum of 120 days. And that's because we build in these commission approvals on either end of the state's regulatory process. And in addition to those 120 days, we could even extend it out further because of the stakeholder outreach we do when we have very technical regulations, unlike these. And also just the time it takes for staff to actually do the drafts. So this slide shows you that, for example, if at the May 1st meeting, the commission votes to authorize us to submit these to the ALR committee, they will appear in the Maryland Register as proposed regulations, 30-day comment period. After 45 days, the next commission meeting after that will come back to you all. That could be August at its earliest. And then we would we would publish them back in the register. And after that publication date, 10 days after that is when the regulations become effective. So one more slide, Kate. So this is just to kind of give you an idea. This is tentative. Essentially, if the commission voted at its May 1st meeting, the earliest effective date would be September. So that just kind of gives you like kind of bookending what I talked about in the beginning and how the process works for us now, like all the other state agencies. So that's our timing. It could be greater. We're not in a hurry. As Kate mentioned, we are reaching out to our local government partners. So they're all the critical area planners that we work at the local level, asking them to give us comments back by April 15th and reaching out to either Kate or myself with any questions. So anything that we receive, we will report out to you all at our next meeting, which happens to be May 1st. So I thank you for your time and I'll turn it back over to Chair Fisher.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kate. I recognize this is this is kind of a doozy, at least from a stack of paper perspective. And I know for many of us, it's the first time working on regulations as a member of the commission. As mentioned, this is probably the best first shot at it because in every sense of the word, it really is not a policy change. It really is just to help make our work and the work of our partners and stakeholders more efficient and more clear. So we'll run it through the process, see how everybody feels, but especially given the length of it and the fact that it is new work to many of us, we're certainly not going to push it. If people have questions, if there are concerns, if there are comments, we're bringing it back to the May 1st meeting. We don't have to vote on it at May 1st. If the commission isn't ready, we can take another meeting or two. But that is the schedule that is available to us. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this stage? All right. Hearing none, I will conclude this section with a huge thank you to three former members of the commission who spent many months, years of their lives working on this set of regulations. Some of you were fortunate enough to have worked with Chair Margaret McHale, who was chair 2 chairs ago, former executive director Ren Siri, and former subcommittee chair Gary Setzer, also of the Department of the Environment for many, many years. They know this program inside and out, and they poured their hearts into developing a set of regulations that is clear, concise, reflects the intent and the letter of critical area law and policy. And I just want to thank them publicly for the countless hours that they spent on this draft. Doesn't mean you can't ask questions or make changes, but I think they gave us a really solid foundation to work from moving forward. So thank you, Margaret, Ren, and Gary. Hopefully you're someplace warm and relaxing today, not watching this meeting. With that, we will move to our project and program subcommittee agendas. This is the first meeting where we have a slightly different process for handling the approvals of this. We talked about it at some length at the last meeting. Just to recap, we're looking at a multi-track process now, where depending on how things go in subcommittee, we are able to take a more abbreviated process in the full meeting. Specifically, we were looking at the introduction of a consent calendar. And just to refresh, those items that are eligible for consent by this full body are those that were recommended by the subcommittee, entirely consistent with the staff reports that you all received earlier. So in other words, if there is a project or a program item that makes it through the subcommittee with no changes to the recommendation, no changes to the conditions, no additional conditions, no different recommendation than what the staff recommended, that item is eligible for a consent vote by the full commission. As it happens, all three of our agenda items today came through subcommittee exactly as recommended by staff. So all three of those items were eligible for consent. The second item on the project subcommittee, I requested to pull off the consent agenda. Remember, any member, any of you can pull an item off of the consent agenda. And I will ask if there is anyone who would like to pull another item off of the consent agenda here in a moment. But the reason that I asked for the Summers Cove to be pulled off is because while that recommendation is entirely consistent with the staff recommendation, it does include something brand new for the commission. And I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to air that out. I personally am fully supportive of the recommendation of the subcommittee, but I think it's worth a couple of minutes of our time to discuss that recommendation in a little bit of detail. So with that, that leaves two items eligible for consent today. We have the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Sandy Point State Park South Beach Area Restoration Project that was recommended approved with conditions consistent with the staff report. And the program subcommittee item, a refinement Queen Anne's County non-water dependent structures on piers text amendment. Are there any members? We will be voting on these as a batch unless there is a member who wishes to pull one of these from the consent and have a presentation and discussion. Is there any member who would like to pull either of those items off of the consent agenda for today? Okay, seeing none, that will constitute the consent agenda, and I will ask for a motion on that agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Seconded by Hertz.
Thank you, Sandy. The consent agenda has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Rosa, yes.
I just have a clarifying question on the non-water dependent structures on pier text amendment. It referred to in the staff report that there was a reason that the Queen Anne's County believed that this portion needed to be moved before their comprehensive review. Is that reason, could someone elaborate on that reason, like why this needs to move separately, or what caused the need for this amendment at this particular moment?
Absolutely. Staff could address that question.
Yes, Commissioner Hans, I can answer that question. This is Kate Charbonneau. So the county proposed to move that text amendment forward. They are dealing with a project that would potentially take advantage of this language if it's approved. So while they are continuing to work on their comprehensive review of their critical area program, and that might take some time. They wanted to have these provisions in place, knowing that there was a project application out there.
Okay, and is that a project, thank you so much. Is that a project application that then therefore would not need to come in front of this body because the text amendment would grant it the, is it like I assume like a commercial project that qualifies under the definitions that we're creating here?
Right, so if a project were to, if a local jurisdiction opts into the non-water dependent structure provisions, what it does is it allows an application to move forward. It has to be approved by Maryland Department of the Environment. They have, requires a title wetlands authorization, and then also would require a local permit by the county. And it would have to be consistent with the provisions as outlined within the natural resources article and as are included within their program. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Sure thing.
Excellent. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a voice vote. All in favor of moving the consent agenda as identified on the agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Very good. Sorry, Commissioner Haynes,
I abstain.
one abstention. With that, our consent items are approved for today. That leaves the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Summers Cove Marina updates on conditions of approval and mitigation summary reports. Committee Chair Bunker and I believe Charlotte Ms. Sheeran will be helping us through
Yes.
this one.
Yep. Chair Bunker, would you like me to share my presentation, or did you want to give a summary first?
I think that you got the wrong chair.
You're
This
right,
is
I do.
project-
Just
project
kidding.
is
I was seeing who was paying attention.
good.
And Steve passed with flying colors. Very well. Sorry, Tammy.
That's right.
Subcommittee Co-Chair Robeson.
Right, no, Charlotte, you can move forward with the presentation.
Okay. Is everybody viewing my presentation in presentation mode?
Looking good, Charlotte.
Yes.
Okay. I am going to give a summary report on the Summers Cove Marina Mitigation Plan. If you'll recall, this project was approved by the Commission in September 2023. A condition of that approval was that once the Department of Natural Resources worked out how they were going to meet the required mitigation, they would come back in for approval of that mitigation plan. So this is what the Department of Natural Resources has proposed. So there is a combination of different types of mitigation being done on the site. Part of the mitigation is going to be eradicating existing Phragmites and replanting in those areas. There are also two one stormwater best management practice located here. Let's see if I can get my. So this is the best management practice being proposed. And then there will also be permeable pavers proposed, which is another stormwater best management practice. Tree planting and vegetation will be back here, and then the purple or pink is the Phragmites eradication and replanting. So there are also several tide gates being installed along the bulkhead, which are the stars. So to kind of review the required mitigation versus the proposed mitigation package, There were 0.64 pounds of phosphorus removal that was required. With the permeable pavers and the other BMP, they are actually providing over 3 pounds of phosphorus removal. So there is a significantly greater amount of phosphorus removal proposed than what was required. For buffer mitigation, there was 15,648 square feet of planting required for the boat ramp portion of the project, and an additional 2.75 acres of planting required for the bulkhead replacement. The mitigation associated with the boat ramp results in about 1/2 acre of additional planting. However, the mitigation provided for the bulkhead replacement has a deficit of 1.6 acres of planting. So what DNR is asked of the project subcommittee here was whether the additional phosphorus removal could be used to meet the deficit in buffer planting mitigation required. And the project subcommittee did recommend or vote to approve this package based on several factors associated with this site. So the site itself is obviously heavily developed, as you can see from this image. It is in the intensely developed area. The site is designated as a buffer modification area. And the buffer mitigation that is being met with this additional stormwater is a result of the bulkhead replacement, which, as you can see, that disturbance is primarily impervious surface or lawn. There was no removal of any trees or vegetation associated with that disturbance. So given those kind of situational characteristics of the site, the project subcommittee did vote to approve this package. And I will turn it back over to Chair Roberson, or I don't know, Chair Fisher, if you'd like to take over.
Yep, Co-Chair Roberson, you have the floor. I think Rosa has a
Thanks.
question as well.
All right, I don't see any hands up. So Rosa, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. I apologize. I wasn't able to see the presentation at the project subcommittee. I recognize that, I could have participated then. But I do have a question about the best management practice that's proposed in the corner. I think it was mentioned either in the staff report or maybe you just said it, that it's a gravel area. Was there any discussion of is there a plan for plantings within that, like a submerged gravel wetland planting possibility?
Yes, so I believe that is the practice that is proposed there. Kate Durant in our office might be more familiar, but my understanding is that area is currently parking lot or asphalt, and it will be turned into a submerged gravel wetland.
That is correct, Charlotte. This is Kate Durant.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't tell from the map. It actually kind of looked like it was a tree area, so I was a little bit confused.
Sorry. Yeah, it's existing asphalt. And I believe my understanding is that they are experiencing flooding issues in that area anyway, like the stormwater is already gathering there. So I think it does make a lot of sense to turn that into a BMP.
Yep, that makes sense. I think, yeah, I think that was all. I was just kind of curious as to if there were any other opportunities kind of along the edge to do additional planting that might mitigate the need for kind of accepting of it. It it's just a little, thank you, Chair Fisher, for asking for the summary report, because it is a little odd that we would consider like a tide valve to be, able to offset for planting requirements. These are fundamentally different types of mitigation practices.
Yeah, I think that the actual offset for the planting requirements is more coming from the additional stormwater mitigation they're providing. So the tidal gauges are, I think, going to certainly help the site in regards to the flooding issues they have there. But as far as the mitigation, I would look at it more as the additional stormwater is offsetting the buffer impact mitigation.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no additional questions, may I have?
Tammy,
a
we've got
motion-
a hand from Commissioner Richards.
I don't know, I'm not seeing the hands. All right, sorry, Annie.
That's okay. I just, to kind of follow, in looking at the acceptance of the lower planting plan in exchange for the stormwater to reduce phosphorus, are we attaching any monitoring to these functions for the site implementation? Are there any monitoring requirements?
So I do not believe that the commission would have monitoring requirements related to that. I am wondering if MDE would have requirements related to the stormwater practices. I'm not certain of the answer to that, but I can look into it.
Okay.
All right, I don't see any additional hands unless somebody else does.
I think we're clear.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the mitigation package as submitted by DNR consistent with the staff report?
I make a motion. Hitesh.
Thank you. May I have a second motion to approve?
I make a second.
All right. Any discussion?
I'll pipe in here, since it's my fault we're talking about this. We have gone the other way a number of times as a commission where there's a deficit on the phosphorus, and you make that up with plantings, which I think is very intuitive, because those plantings do remove phosphorus in addition to providing the habitat benefits that this commission also holds as a core goal of the program. This is the first time we're going the other direction, as Commissioner Richards highlighted, and allowing an additional phosphorus reduction to stand in for a planting requirement. And I think my comfort in doing this in this specific case is really focused on the intensity of the existing development on the site. It is in an IDA, it is in a modified buffer area. But I think even more than that is that the improvement generating the planting requirement didn't take out any habitat. It's basically an in-kind replacement. So we're not missing out on a habitat benefit that normally we would need to recover through mitigation. So with that, I'm a yes vote on this one. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Project is hereby approved. That completes our project and program subcommittee agendas. Thank you all for your willingness to try out our new process here. We're going to put some of this in writing and check in with everyone at our retreat as well on this process as we continue to refine how we make decisions as a body. With that, we will move to old business, and the first item is the armored storage approval of mitigation site. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. So this is just a quick recap. As many of you may remember, back in June of 2023, the commission approved growth allocation in Queen Anne's County at the armored storage site, where they changed the designation from LDA to IDA. Back in December of 2023, they came back to the program subcommittee because they needed an additional 60 days to complete the forest mitigation plan. Commission approved updates to that, which included changes to species type, monitoring, maintenance, and measurements to protect the survival of planted vegetation. That was to be submitted within 60 days to Critical Area Commission staff. That was done in this past February. The updated plan met all the conditions of approval of the commission from December. So no further action is necessary. So I just wanted to report that all those conditions, that condition has now been met.
Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
Comments, questions from the commission? Seeing none. Ms. Sharon, Cecil County map update, conditions of approval.
So when Cecil County came in for their boundary map update, they had moved through that process locally without also updating their critical area program, that the updates that are associated with the map update, which include changing the definition of the critical area in the program. And so a condition of approval of the map update was that they do a text amendment to make that definition change in their program. And they have done that locally and submitted it to the commission. So that condition of approval has been met.
So much good news this afternoon. Thank you, Charlotte. Comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, we will move to work group updates. Charlotte, you're back up. The DEIJ work group.
Yes, thank you. So the DEIJ policy work group has now met, I believe, twice. I want to extend a huge thank you to the commissioners who are on that work group, Commissioner Grant, Commissioner Rodvian, Commissioner Mulkey, and Commissioner Herr Cornwell. We are making great progress. Our third meeting is, I believe, next week or the week after. And we'll hopefully be finalizing the purpose and vision statements for the document. And we will also be starting in on our guiding principles of the document. So we are moving right along. It's going excellent.
Wonderful. Any questions for Charlotte on that work group? Very good. Back to you, Nick, for our sister work group on State Highway Administration mitigation.
Sure, thank you. So the State Highway and the Regional Mitigation Banking Work Group, that first meeting was in February. I want to thank Commissioners Robertson, Hance, Hewitt, Kiernan, McCall, and Richards for being a part of that. That first meeting, we covered the basics of mitigation banking and a very brief overview of the State Highway Administration's proposal, and outlined our goals of the work group, which is to come up with parameters in which the Commission could be comfortable with this regional banking idea. Our second meeting is going to be April 4th. That meeting, we expect State Highway Administration and Maryland Transportation Administration to do presentations discussing their needs for regional mitigation banking, and MDTA will talk about their roadside banks that they currently have. That's been approved by the Commission under an MOU. And we are also going to hopefully set up some site visits to get the work groups out there to take a look at some of these existing sites and proposed areas. So that is hopefully talk about it a little bit more in April. So we're looking forward to that.
The idea of a field trip just makes me feel warm after this long winter that we've had. So that is wonderful. Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
Any questions or comments for Nick on that work group? Very good. Takes us to the final item, new business. I just have a couple of quick updates for you all, and then we can call it a day. First, legislation. We've been providing some updates on that throughout the process. We are in post crossover now, especially for those of you who follow the state legislature know that that's always a big day. It's a milestone. I'm happy to report that both of the commission's pieces of legislation did make it cross chamber prior to crossover. Senate Bill 268 is the enforcement provision cleanup bill. That did make it to the House with plenty of time to spare. And we're waiting for the hearing to be scheduled on that one. And then the big bill, climate equity and efficiencies, House Bill 233 was the cross file of Senate Bill 306, and that is the one that did make it across. The House passed that bill last week, so it is now in E3, awaiting a hearing on the Senate side. Since that did have a cross file, the Senate has already heard the bill. We do understand they're interested in a couple of amendments, but we are actively working with members and their staff in these final weeks to see if we can get both of these bills across the finish line. Any questions on the legislation where it stands? If you happen to run into your state elected representative, please feel free to encourage them to pass these bills. I think it'll set us up for some exciting work in the years ahead as a group. All right, finally, just a scheduling note. Our next full commission meeting is May 1st. You will have a subcommittee meeting ahead of that. And then May 15th, we're looking at our retreat. Thank you for those of you who have responded one way or another. Excited at the critical mass that is building for attendance on the 15th. Very much looking forward to spending some extended time with you all, getting to know each other a little better, getting to dive in on our work in a little bit more detail, do a little bit of work planning, do a little bit of what is often known as resource awareness, getting outside, enjoying this tidal shoreline landscape that we work so hard to protect. I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a good mix of work and play, and always good food. So hope to see as many of you as possible on the 15th as well. With that, open the floor. Are there any comments from any commission member? Seeing none, any further items from staff? Thank you, as always, to our staff for getting us through another meeting, prepared and informed and ready to go. With that, we are adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.